Hi, I'm Martika from 12th House Art. This is the first video in a series called Intuition Series, where I am going into intuition, how that shows up for different people in different ways. This is the first interview with Eriko Takeno. She is a friend of mine. She's an artist and a poet and is currently on her second art residency that I have watched her experience in the last 12 months. And it is so exciting to go on the journey with Eriko because she is such an incredibly embodied spirit. She is open and offering of her insights and her experiences. If you haven't checked out her work yet, I'm going to leave her social media and her website in the description for everybody to be able to experience her work. I absolutely love it. So this being the first interview, there was absolutely no framing in the call itself. So I'm doing this introduction here to introduce because we get straight into the dialogue with Eriko. Before I hit record in the conversation, we'd been talking about the Jupiter in Taurus ingress that we experienced whenever this was filmed. I'm thinking June, May, whenever that was. And we were reflecting because we're both Taurus native suns. We are about 12 days apart and we have a really similar birth chart, and we love exploring that together intuitively and seeing what comes up. But this conversation was one I hadn't reflected on with the ingress that we experienced, and that was Jupiter entering into Taurus. And I was trying to remember what was going on for me at that time, and Eriko shared what was happening for her at that time, which I don't think this recording is going to cover that, but it was really profound. And what we talk about in this chat is it's kind of like it's like a progression where we've ended up since that 11 years ago, 12 years ago, when we last experienced Jupiter in Taurus. We talked a little bit about natural disaster, and we reflected a little bit on how that came up for us and what that felt like. But this video is talking about intuition, and Eriko is incredibly open in her experiences with her intuition and how that comes through for her. And so this series is looking at intuition through the lens of an element and how we experience aspects of that element as intuitive guidance. So Eriko's work particularly, she's moving into a PhD soon, and that will be very exciting. I think that it's the kind of thing that is really pertinent to the time that we're in at the moment. What she's doing is finding pathways for clairsenses to be, I feel like, more widely talked about and acknowledged and experienced. So we go into a little bit of what that is for her, what clairsenses are for Eriko, and we talk about the way that her progression in understanding these and experiencing these particular clairsenses. So that is what her thesis aims to be about. Eriko is working on delivering a program or an applicable system to experience poetic healing, which is her core work. Poetic healing, as a tool for healing the clairsenses. So what she does by looking at this is acknowledge that there are such a thing as clairsentience and clairaudience. And what we talk about when we have those things is that we are experiencing our intuition in a way that we acknowledge as sentience. I'm thinking, I'm experiencing, I'm feeling, I'm aware. And those correlate, I feel like, to the element of water and emotion. So that's why I've chosen Eriko to be representative of water and her lens as water. She's got a very beautiful watery sort of vibe, and we're going to get into that. So here, the first clip that we're going to go to is Eriko talking about where she's at now in this new ingress and this period from the last Jupiter in Taurus transit that we experienced in 2011. And we had just got done talking about the natural disasters that were happening at that time, and we're now leading into Eriko finding herself listening to her intuition, communicating with her teacher, who had a very significant, from how I am watching the story unfold, it was very significant, this teacher, in being a marker for Eriko's sentient growth, communication, and her work. So that's where we're going to get started, and we might have a recap at the end of the video. We'll just have to see. I don't remember if it ends very logically or not. that will be the first installment of the intuition series here for the 12th house. We're trying to get a feel and a conversation started about intuition not being one size fits all, and that people have ways to experience it quite differently from each other. And let's create language around that, and let's talk about what that feels like, so that we know that this stuff is happening. We are waking up to subtle energies, subtleties within ourselves. So
21, I decided, like, I think I talked about this moment actually when we had the Instagram interview. It was the very first strongest intuition, kind of this synchronicity kind of feeling that, okay, now is the last chance if I want to really take my direction. Like, now I have to, it's the last time, like last chance. I basically took a year break from my university. Until then, I was literally following the, you know, the direction as the same as others, and I never had the moment that to stop it, basically. So that was kind of for me, it was a big moment. 2011 when I was 21. And then what I did basically is I went to US, New York City, and I started to living alone as first time in my life. And it was again first time to live in like outside of Japan. So I just put so many new things on my shoulder, but I knew that I had to do it. So as you know, I've been kind of in the process of getting ready for my PhD program, and I'm like, it basically, how do I say, like, I'm back in academic email, like not necessarily one-to-one conversation, but I still have this feeling that I'm getting back in a way. This certain layer of my way of communicating with others when it comes to academic. And it, I don't know if I even can describe it with words and explain it, but basically what I'm feeling is that I'm talking with the same person. So I mentioned about this guy previously. He was the head of my course in my MA. So I was in contact with him before, and I'm getting in touch with him again. So I'm talking to the same person, but the way I deliver my words and the way I communicate with people have completely shifted compared to, say, like 4 years ago.
You refer to 4 or 5 years ago because that's the time you were last
exactly
in that space. Right.
So I have words and contents that I want to deliver to him, but this vessel, in a way, if we call email as one of a vessel,
absolutely,
it's such a experimental process for me right now. Like, how do I craft this ship? Like, how do I craft? And it's taking so long just to write one email, and it's so strange feeling. And I know that this kind of, if we call it as a struggle or confusion, I know within it, I still remember this old routines and old habits and old way of communicating things. I still remember them because I'm talking with the same person. You know, in a way, he's helping me to recognize how I was communicating before. But then now my body or my the container that I deliver these messages I know them now, so it's strange, kind of how do I say, like a
you're
puzzle.
applying something new to this old way, but you have a familiarity with the old way because
Yeah,
it's just allowing an application of everything that you've culminated to coming to, and you have that framework or that scaffolding for
yeah.
the container, and you're filling it now with a matured sense of air or
Yeah,
communication, and with your
yeah.
sword.
So
That's really
I don't know if I progressed. I don't know if I
Mhm.
completed a progress,
Okay.
but I can see that I am, moving
Moving
forward.
forward.
Yeah. So yeah.
And such a good pocket to focus our lens for the conversation, because I know that you said with his name, this teacher, that it wasn't the whole thing when we talked about preparing for this conversation, but it seems like a really good analogy, and what you've just explained there highlights that you had a working language and a working knowledge of doing this, but even at that time there was this space that was allowed for you because he was not as traditional as could possibly be expected, and you already had some freedom with that.
Yeah.
And then now you're revisiting that in a new and kind
Yeah.
of applied way of expressing all of that stuff, and then it so happens to be the topics of what we're talking about now with our clair senses and developing them. So I feel like that is a nice circle
Yeah.
from my perspective to it's very interwoven deeply,
Yeah. Yeah.
and we can see that. So I wonder if you would feel comfortable if we, I don't know if you want to start with having a brief look at the clair senses themselves and perhaps a little context for the work that you are doing. You don't need to give away your whole thesis, but certainly what you are expecting by being in that field and working with those things and balancing that formality with this intuitive thing, because that's the premise of what we're discussing, is finding that balance between, a friend pointed to me as well, it's not traditional because it's relatively new, this formal void of culture, it's very, it's not a traditional way of communicating, because traditionally and organically and naturally we do that in person and in a far more fluid way. But that's the nature of the conversation that we're having, is with the clair senses being woven into that. And how do we do that? So if we talk first about the clair senses, how would you give them a description, if you could? Do you have a nice definition for that, or what is your working definition at this point when you discuss them?
Maybe not in a few words, but basically for me, what is clear senses is that it's like a warming up my muscles. So I feel like just like everyone else, I always had this ability of clear senses, just like everyone else. However, because I didn't put enough love, enough warming up practice to my clear senses ability, it has been frozen. And for me, in my case, the experiences of depression, severe depression, has been a huge help, huge support for me to really start to pouring love to this ability. And I don't know how to clarify it, but
I think that's very clear, because it tends to take a separation. If we think of a separation of the skin like such a wound in a physical sense and compare that to depression, you have a rush of blood, a rush of source coming to that spot to support that. And I think this happens with us mentally. And if we're experiencing depression, or mentally or emotionally, if we're experiencing that disjointedness, there's a rush of source energy that comes there, and it will, I feel like it does awaken those things. So it's almost like it's necessary. And certainly I feel, I wrote about this recently with the respect to the descent, that these stages are necessary. But my mother taught me, when there's something happening, you know, in the midst of a descent, she says, if you're sad for more than 3 days, or if you feel like past 3 days you're still not progressing, then that is time to address it. But she says always 3 days grace is appropriate for whether it's speaking to a person after a conflict, or measuring your own mood and an emotional sense. And that's the time to understand when you need to go deeper, maybe. But from a clairsenses perspective, it's funny to have that awareness. And like you said, it's frozen, and we need the love, that source, to come in and warm that up, when maybe was it frozen in the first place because it wasn't used, or was it not used because it was frozen? We could debate that forever, but the point is that that source energy gets there. And what can we do when they start to waken up, and when they start to aliven? It's essentially, it's our regular senses, our sight, our sound, our smell, our taste, our touch, and our I think I didn't miss anything. And I feel like it's like an extension beyond those, into out of the body, into the spirit, having those same senses activated. Or that's where the bridge comes in. I feel like, as we talked about, the premise also of it, our senses and our body being a conduit for that intuition, and these channels of senses where it can kind of come from. And do you look at them as a holistic sort of a system, the way the rest of our body is, or do you like to deal with them on their own and meditate with them, each one individually? Or do you have an approach for looking at
you
them?
mean each of the senses, like taste and smell, or each of the
clair senses, I would say.
okay.
If you feel one unfreezing, or you feel one activated, do they all become activated together for you, or do you want a full processing and full understanding and witnessing of a single sense at a time?
So when the word itself, like clear senses, clear cognizant, these words, when they came into my life, I knew that I knew some of them were already activated within me. Not to say that it's that were fully activated, but I know that they were kind of being activated within me. And these were clear senses and clear cognizant. And for the rest, I could see some of the moments, maybe these messages were coming through these other senses, like clear abilities, for instance, clear audience, etc. But for me, clear cognizant and clear senses, right? No, clear sentience. Yeah, sorry. Yeah, these two were, I know that I could more easily work with. I started to more basically pouring love. Like I started to more consciously working with them. And especially clear sentience, this is what I've been I think working with a lot more. And basically what my artwork and what my methods and what my projects are working with, I think, if that makes sense.
I wonder, with your artwork, you mentioned it's one of the ways that you experience your clairsentience and feel your clairsentience.
So basically, like if I introduce myself and if I introduce my journey, poetry took a whole lead. So poetry came first. And with that, I started to basically decipher my physical experiences and the mental experiences that followed my physical experiences. So always poetry took a lead. And with especially like as an artist and as a poet and as a researcher, my focus is not always to create a very fine poem, but rather how poem itself helped me to transform myself and how I experience the process of one poem being given birth, if that makes sense.
Yes,
And
this is perfect explanation of that.
in that process, basically in the journey of creating one poem, the process helps me to basically for instance, decompose what I thought, what is what, you know? So for instance, I could think this experience, this physical sensation is whole my story. It was coming from myself. I could think in that way, but then by deciphering this one sensation through poetic thinking, I started to kind of pinpoint, oh, this is actually coming from here, and that is coming from there. And sometimes it's not even from my experience, but it's something that I felt from someone else, and I took it as my feeling, etc. So I think this way of experiencing poetry helped me to understand basically what all these sensations that I've been experiencing in my life, which is sometimes overwhelming, because if I already have this naturally working clear sentience, of course I've been taking a lot more than what I as a one person experiencing, if that makes sense.
It absolutely makes sense. Certainly you would expect to see maybe debris or some of these things from beyond yourself, because as we just mentioned, it is going beyond yourself, these senses. And sometimes it's nice to, when you're aware of that, because you can sometimes limit some of that debris, right? But you're talking about it taking a process of understanding the origins of this debris and the new formations that it takes without your sentience sometimes, because sometimes this stuff does build and we don't realize until we lift that rug and we go, oh my gosh, okay, well, that was that situation. But then again, just to rubber band back to the formality and the informal, because what we're talking about here, I use the word art and I don't mean a paintbrush on a canvas, I mean a craft and a skill. And so if we use the word art, typically people's mind goes to hyperrealism, oil or acrylic on canvas in a frame on a gallery by a white man from 200 years ago. And we're talking like, this is what generally, and I know I'm being general, and I know that most people are not that limited in their understanding of things. But if we use that as a sounding point for formal and common and traditional quote unquote art, we forget that there is the it's not just expressive, like you said, it's explorative. And when we look at so many different art movements, like secessionalism, for one, for me, I love the Austrian secessionalists, but there's always elements of society in that. And it's always, art movements are centered around society because there was a high society association with art. But when we start having these revolutionaries in their breakaway groups or art movements that tend to last for a fixed period of time, it's because they're having that snapshot of it being an experience and a process like you're talking about. But you're also moving beyond that and it becoming really even more than art therapy, even though it probably is art therapy, by detailing more than just, again, because that's typically still expression, and you're looking deeper in the introspection, real self-discovery, and it's almost like still really doing some work, like a lot of mental work to unpack those things. And by proxy, it still delivers something beautiful and aesthetic that is pleasing, and that's why we call it art, right? But it has such a greater function than to be something pretty to look at. And a lot of artists love to get the viewers to, I know, experience as they were creating. So some leave their pieces on the floor, or installation pieces like you have a lot of in some of your shows, and that's such more immersive, such a far more immersive experience. And do you think having those immersive experiences, do you have conversations with people when you've had a gallery showing before? Do you find people respond to this art as a process easily? Are people generally quite comfortable now to be doing this sort of thing and expecting to see spiritual processing going into something beautiful that they look at? Are people open to it yet?
I think in general, not yet, but for sure there are people, certain amount of people who are open in that way. And maybe one interesting example is that if you remember, my graduation project was this huge poetry installation.
I love that.
And with that installation, I had particular intention for the piece to be experienced as a healing process. Like, I was basically wanted to share how poetry helped me to heal myself. So my intention was not to deliver the content of the poems written itself to the audience, but when people comes in and when people have this particular purpose of seeing artwork that are beautifully done, they get confused because my work was not showing poems clearly, but rather as a whole, presenting the experience, the physical experiences and the sensational experiences that poetry gave me in the process. So my work gave a bit of confusion to some audience, I remember. So this is kind of example to say that not everyone is yet ready to experience the work as a process in a way, but rather visiting the show to, in a way, have some sort of conclusion in a way. So,
Yeah. How did you meet that confusion? Were you able to be, I mean, you wouldn't have been able to be present at the gallery for the entire showing. So how did you meet that? And was it from people that you knew who were expecting to see this conclusive piece or something like this?
So first of all, the first time I recognized this reaction to my work was basically in a final exam in my MA. You know, we have to basically logically explain about the whole process, and we need to meet the criterias. And it was still a very interesting experience that overall I had a really, really good grade, like as an overall. However, when we kind of separate the, how do I say, like when we look into the each criteria,
the selection criteria for the overall,
confused if this work is completed. However, with that, such an essential question,
right,
I got a really, really good grade.
okay.
It's such a strange situation for me, like, because if the examiner even doesn't know if this work is completed or not, how can I get a good grade? It's so strange, you know? But then how I took that experience is that they could feel it.
Yes.
They knew, they can feel it, that this work is completed and this work is done as it is. But when they try to rationalize, it doesn't make sense, possibly. So this whole strange experience was the first time, or the first example for me to understand my work as not always intending to deliver the final answer or final conclusion, but rather simply sharing my process. And because it is process, of course, it's not ending, it is continuous. And that's why they can't say that this work is completed.
Right.
That makes sense.
It absolutely does. That makes perfect sense. I don't know if it's too simple to say, is the expectation around a product, a final product, or is it around a service? And you've essentially delivered a service because you've taken them on the journey of the process. And it's this beautiful interplay between subjectivity and objectivity. And is it up to the viewer to decide if they're satisfied with what this was? But with an oil painting on the wall, they can get there faster because they know what they're expecting. But if it is a process, it requires them to do the work to understand that this is a process, and have I completed the process as a viewer? Have I reached a conclusion, my own understanding of what this is for and what function and what service this gives me as a consumer of art? And that's why I think it, like, what a clever and beautiful thing for that process to be accepted in a formal situation, especially when there is numbered selection criteria in an assessment. And what a commendable tutor or lecturer who marked your work to accept that. And isn't that beautiful that that can happen? How powerful beyond just a good grade is that is appearing in a traditional and formal system? And is this the person who marked this? Is that the person you refer to? It is.
Exactly. One more thing about this importance of developing clear sentience.
Absolutely.
So I was just reflecting on these, the questions that you gave me initially, and the point, excuse me. So the point I saw was that because especially clear sentience is so embedded in our physical body, once we started to mindfully and wholeheartedly understand what clear sentience for you is, the beautiful integration of our physical body and the basically the spirits that we are connecting through clear sentience are really merged into one. And it really helps to the integration, because these information are coming through our body when it comes to clear sentience. So that's what I felt as a great value in respecting this information that we are getting through clear sentience, and also nurturing them, I think.